Hey guys, tonight we begin with a romantic evening that has historically ended inconsistently. You're on a date with Henry VIII, King of England, breaker of churches, writer of love songs, and a man whose relationship history reads like a cautionary nursery rhyme. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always find it fascinating how many of you would voluntarily attend Tudor court. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that drafty stone castle ambience, and let's ease into tonight's royal courtship. The royal summons arrives on thick parchment, sealed with red wax, and the unmistakable Tudor rose pressed firmly into it, as if the wax itself knows this is important. You stare at it, because this is not the kind of invitation you casually misplace under a stack of laundry. This is from Henry VIII, King of England, breaker of papal relations, composer of love songs, collector of wives in varying conditions. The handwriting is elegant, the tone charming, warm even. His Majesty has heard of your grace, your wit, your admirable virtues, and requests the pleasure of your company for an evening of dining and music at Hampton Court. Requests. A bold word choice for a man who can legally unrequest you from existence. You read it again. Dining, music, conversation. That sounds harmless. People dine every day. Music is pleasant. Conversation builds connection. And yet your mind, unhelpfully, begins reviewing the marital statistics. 6 wives, 2 annulled, 2 executed, 1 died, 1 survived. Those are not comforting odds. You reassure yourself. You are not marrying him. You are simply attending dinner. Many people attend royal dinners and live to tell the tale. Probably. Preparations begin immediately. Wardrobe becomes a strategic decision. Too modest, and you appear dull. Too bold, and you appear threatening. Too intelligent, and you risk intimidation. Not intelligent enough, and you risk boredom. You aim for gracefully impressive but not historically problematic. Jewellery is chosen carefully, nothing sharper than a butter knife in symbolic value. Friends react predictably, some gasp with excitement. The king himself. Others stare at you the way people stare at someone who has just announced they're taking up lion taming. Be agreeable, one advises. Laugh at his jokes, another adds. Do not mention his previous wives, a third whispers urgently, as if you were planning to bring visual aids. As the day approaches, excitement and calculation wrestle quietly in your chest. Henry, in his youth, was brilliant, athletic, educated, charming, a Renaissance prince admired across Europe. You tell yourself you're meeting that version, not the later, temperamental, politically stressed, suspicious version. Probably. Still, as you seal your acceptance and hand it to the courier, one truth settles in with surprising clarity. This is not just an invitation, it is an audition. And in Tudor England, auditions are less about chemistry and more about compliance. You take a steady breath. It's just dinner, with a man who once rewrote England's entire religious structure over a marital disagreement. But yes, just dinner. The gates of Hampton Court rise before you like a very expensive warning. Red brick towers, ornate chimneys, banners bearing the Tudor rose snapping in the wind. The palace does not whisper wealth, it announces it loudly and repeatedly. As your carriage rolls through the courtyard, you feel it immediately. You are being watched. Courtiers linger in clusters, pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Ladies in elaborate gowns tilt their heads just slightly. Men in fine doublets assess you the way investors assess volatile stock. Because dating Henry is not a private matter. It is a national storyline. You step down from the carriage carefully. Grace is critical. Tripping here would not just bruise your dignity. It would echo through court gossip by morning. Inside, Hampton Court is overwhelming. Tapestries stretch across walls, depicting biblical scenes and heroic triumphs. subtle reminders that this is a man who sees himself in epic proportions. The ceilings are high enough to make you feel appropriately mortal. The floors polished to a shine that reflects candlelight like liquid gold. Servants glide silently. Nobles murmur strategically. You are escorted through corridors that feel designed to intimidate. Every doorway seems slightly taller than necessary. Every portrait stares just long enough to make you question your posture. You remind yourself to breathe. This is just dinner, not a treaty negotiation, not a theological debate, just dinner. And yet, the atmosphere feels like a performance is about to begin. As you enter the great hall, the scale hits you fully. Long banquet tables, silver goblets, candles arranged in precise symmetry, musicians waiting discreetly at the edge of the room. This is not a casual meal. This is theatre, and you are about to step onto the stage. A lady in waiting leans toward you gently. His Majesty enjoys confidence, she whispers, but not arrogance. Helpful. Another adds quietly, he admires wit. You nod. And loyalty. The first finishes pointedly. Ah, there it is. The subtext of the evening. This is not about whether you enjoy his company. It is about whether you fit into his narrative. As you take your place and wait for the king's entrance, one thought crystallizes clearly. You are not walking into a date. You are walking into history. And history, in this particular palace, has a very sharp memory. The room shifts before he even appears. It's subtle at first, a tightening of posture, a ripple of stillness through the courtiers. Conversations soften, laughter fades. Every spine straightens by instinct. Then the doors open. Henry VIII enters. He does not rush. He does not need to. The space rearranges itself around him. Broad-shouldered, imposing, wrapped in layers of velvet and fur trimmed in gold thread, he looks less like a man attending dinner and more like a walking declaration of authority. Jewels catch the candlelight at his neck and sleeves. Rings flash as he lifts a hand in casual acknowledgement of the room's synchronized bow. And then his eyes land on you. He smiles. It is warm, confident, practiced. You feel the full force of why this keeps happening. Because Henry, when he chooses to be, is magnetic. He approaches with measured steps, boots striking the floor with deliberate rhythm. Up close he is larger than you imagined. Not just physically, though certainly physically, but energetically. His presence demands attention without asking for it. "My lady," he says, voice deep and controlled, "I am most pleased you accepted." You curtsy. Precisely. Not too low, not too brief. "It is my honour, Your Majesty." He studies you for half a second longer than comfort allows. It's not romantic, it's evaluative. But then he laughs, loud and full, and the tension softens. He begins with charm. He asks about your journey, compliments your attire, notes your composure, mentions having heard of your intelligence. You respond lightly, carefully, intelligent but not threatening, confident but not dominant, engaged but not overly bold. It feels less like flirting and more like diplomatic negotiations disguised as small talk. And yet, there's something undeniably compelling about him. The confidence, the certainty, the sense that he genuinely believes the world bends slightly in his direction. Which, historically speaking, it often does. As he gestures for you to walk beside him toward the banquet table, you realize something crucial. This is not a man accustomed to uncertainty. He expects admiration, loyalty, agreement. You are not just impressing a potential suitor. You are navigating a sovereign personality. And as you take your seat beside him, you allow yourself one steadying thought. So far, you are still alive. A promising start. The moment you're seated, the performance begins. Henry turns toward you with an expression that suggests he has already decided you are fascinating, which is flattering, but also mildly alarming given how quickly he forms life-altering conclusions. "You have a most discerning gaze," he says, studying your face as though reading a manuscript. It speaks of intelligence. You thank him gracefully, resisting the urge to ask whether previous wives had less discerning gazes and how that worked out for them. He continues, your wit, your posture, your elegance, your composure in the hall. It is impressive how efficiently he builds admiration. You begin to understand something dangerous. Henry does not flirt casually. He overwhelms. His compliments are not light, they are strategic. He elevates you quickly, places you on a pedestal, wraps admiration around you like velvet. It feels intoxicating. And you can see how, years ago, a young Anne Boleyn might have felt exactly this way. How Catherine of Aragon once believed she was secure. How charm, when delivered by a king, feels like destiny. But there's something else beneath it. Expectation. Every compliment carries a silent condition. You are intelligent. Good. But not too independent. You are confident. Admirable. But not oppositional. You are captivating. Wonderful. But fully devoted. He asks what you value most in life. You choose your words with surgical care. Stability, your majesty. Loyalty, the strength of a united realm. Safe. Very safe. He nods approvingly. You have passed a micro-examination. The musicians begin to play softly in the background. Henry mentions that he himself composes music. He speaks of courtly love, of poetry, of devotion. And for a moment, it almost feels sincere. Perhaps it is. That's the unsettling part. Henry likely believes every word in the moment he speaks it. He falls intensely, decisively, publicly. And just as intensely, he falls out of favour. As he leans slightly closer and lowers his voice, you realise something critical. You are not being courted. You are being assessed for compatibility with a crown. And compatibility, in Tudor England, comes with clauses. Still, you smile. Because at least for now, you are receiving compliments, not accusations. And in this palace, that is a meaningful distinction. The food arrives like a procession. Platters carried in by synchronized servants, roasted venison glistening under candlelight, spiced capons, swan arranged with theatrical precision, towers of sugared fruit rising like edible architecture. This is not dinner. This is propaganda. Henry does not do subtle abundance. Every course is a reminder. England is wealthy. The king is powerful. Scarcity is something that happens to other people. He eats confidently, not rushed, not restrained. With authority, you mirror him carefully, small portions, measured bites, no hesitation, no greed, no visible nerves. The court watches everything. How you hold your goblet, how you taste the wine, whether you laugh at the right moment, whether you appear comfortable. Because this is not just a romantic dinner. It is a public compatibility test disguised as a banquet. Musicians play softly from the edge of the hall. Lutes, viols, gentle harmonies that fill the air without dominating it. The music creates elegance, but the real performance is at the high table. Henry gestures expansively as he speaks to nobles seated nearby. His presence is large, theatrical. He enjoys being observed. You begin to notice how he controls the room without raising his voice. A pause from him shifts attention instantly. A slight frown silences laughter across the table. Power, here, is ambient. A servant refills his cup too slowly. The king's expression tightens. It lasts only a moment, but long enough for the entire table to stiffen. Then he smiles again. The tension dissolves. You understand something essential. The charm is real, but so is the volatility. Dinner continues with ritual precision. Dishes removed, new ones presented. Everything orchestrated to reinforce magnificence. And through it all, you feel the weight of the crown beside you. Henry is not merely a man enjoying a meal. He is a monarch assessing legacy. The abundance around you is not indulgence, it is symbolism, strength, stability, fertility, continuity. As another course is placed before you, one thought settles quietly in your mind. In this palace, nothing is casual. Not the food, not the music, and certainly not the date. As the feast continues, you begin to notice something subtle but undeniable. The room does not simply exist around Henry, it orbits him. Every noble seated nearby measures their reactions against his. If he laughs, they laugh slightly louder. If he frowns, conversation thins immediately. If he leans forward, attention sharpens. This is not admiration, it is calibration. You feel it too, the constant adjustment. Your posture remains upright but relaxed. Your expressions attentive but controlled. You respond when appropriate. Remain silent when wiser. Because here, silence is a skill. The atmosphere grows warmer as candles burn lower. The scent of roasted meats and spiced wine lingers heavily in the air. The musicians continue, but softer now. Background to something less visible and more important. Evaluation. Henry's mood shifts fluidly. One moment animated and expansive, the next contemplative, almost distant. You realize that what feels like unpredictability is actually dominance. He does not need consistency. The court adapts to him. A noble at the far end of the table makes a bold remark. Harmless, perhaps, but slightly off-tone. The king's gaze lingers a fraction too long. The noble corrects himself instantly. The lesson lands without being spoken. You begin to understand how fragile favour must feel in this palace. It is present one moment, uncertain the next. And yet, there is something undeniably impressive about Henry's command. He carries not just authority, but conviction. He believes deeply in his own vision of destiny, in legacy, in England's importance. It is intoxicating in its certainty, but certainty can be sharp. As the evening progresses, you feel the invisible lines of power more clearly. Who speaks freely, who does not, who watches you closely, who avoids your gaze. You are not just seated beside the king. You are inside a structure built on hierarchy, ambition and quiet fear. And you are doing remarkably well. Still poised, still composed, still unaccused. Which, in Tudor England, counts as success. But beneath the polished surface of the banquet hall, one truth becomes increasingly clear. This is not simply a date. It is a test of how well you can exist in the gravitational pull of a man who reshaped a kingdom to suit his will. And then it happens. Not dramatically, not with thunder, just a shift in tone. The conversation drifts, gently, casually, toward legacy, toward heirs, toward sons. Henry does not rant, he does not demand. He speaks thoughtfully, almost philosophically, about the importance of securing England's future, about continuity, about the necessity of a strong male successor. The table grows quieter. You feel it. This is not abstract. This is the core of the matter. Everything before this, the velvet, the music, the swan dramatically posed on a silver platter, was ambiance. This is the agenda. He speaks of responsibility, of how a king must think beyond himself, of how difficult decisions are sometimes required for the greater good. You nod slowly. You resist the urge to glance around the hall and count how many former queens are currently unaccounted for, because suddenly the evening feels less like romance and more like a strategic recruitment effort for biological services. You understand now. You are not being evaluated for charm alone. You are being evaluated for potential. Health, youth, composure, fertility, compatibility with dynastic expectations. It's hard to feel flirtatious when you realize you're essentially being interviewed for future mother of the realm. The king continues almost wistfully about the burden of needing a son, how destiny requires it, how history demands it. You consider responding with something witty. You do not. This is not the moment. Instead, you offer a carefully balanced expression of loyalty to England's stability. Safe, neutral, uncontroversial. Inside, however, your mind is running calculations. Because Henry's romantic enthusiasm has a timeline: admiration, elevation, expectation, and if expectation is not met. History has shown he prefers decisive solutions. You observe him as he speaks, the conviction in his voice, the absolute belief that his desire for a son is not personal preference but divine necessity. That's the unsettling part. He does not see this as ego, he sees it as duty, which makes the stakes infinitely higher. As the musicians resume and conversation gently spreads outward again, one thought settles with surprising clarity. This is not a love story. This is succession planning, and you are currently seated at the center of it. How romantic. The shift is small, almost invisible. A servant moves too slowly. A goblet is placed slightly off-center. A whispered exchange at the lower end of the table carries a tone Henry does not appreciate. It lasts less than a second, but you see it. The warmth drains from his face. His jaw tightens. His eyes sharpen in a way that is not theatrical, not charming, not Renaissance prince at a masquerade. This is something else. The room freezes without instruction. No one moves. No one breathes too loudly. Even the musicians falter for half a heartbeat before continuing. The servant realizes the mistake, though you are not entirely sure what the mistake was, and bows deeply, trembling. Henry says nothing at first, which is worse. Then, with measured calm, he gestures for correction. His tone is controlled, almost gentle. The smile returns. The moment passes. Conversation resumes, but it does not fully recover, because you have now seen the other side. Not the laughing jouster, not the poetic admirer, the sovereign, the man accustomed to absolute obedience. It becomes clear how fragile safety must feel in this palace. Favour is real, but it is conditional. Stability exists, but only as long as it aligns with the king's will. You understand now how affection and fear coexist here. They are not opposites, they are companions. Henry continues the evening smoothly, even graciously. He compliments a noble's loyalty. He praises a recent court performance. He laughs again, full and booming as if nothing happened. But you cannot unsee the flash, and it changes everything. Because charm is appealing, power is impressive, but unpredictability? Unpredictability demands vigilance. As the candles burn lower and the feast transitions toward music and wine, you realize that this evening is not about romance at all. It is about proximity to volatility. And proximity to volatility requires precision. You adjust your posture slightly. You measure your expressions more carefully. You choose silence over spontaneity. Because you now understand something essential. With Henry VIII, the difference between delight and displeasure can be very, very small. And in Tudor England, small differences have very permanent consequences. As the tension from earlier fades into the background, or at least pretends to, the atmosphere shifts again. The tables are partially cleared. Candles burn lower, casting longer shadows across the tapestries. The musicians adjust their instruments, and then Henry rises, not abruptly, not dramatically, but deliberately. There is a murmur of anticipation as he moves toward the musicians and takes up a lute. Yes, the king plays, and not poorly. In fact, he plays well, confidently, fluidly, like a man who once trained seriously and still takes pride in it. The hall grows quiet, not from fear this time, but from genuine attention. The melody is graceful, courtly, almost tender. And for a moment you glimpse something else entirely. Not the calculating sovereign, not the impatient monarch. The young Renaissance prince who once dazzled Europe. There was a time when Henry was known as golden, athletic, learned, admired by foreign courts, a king who wrote poetry and debated theology with enthusiasm, a man who believed himself chosen for greatness. Listening to him now, it's easy to see how that version of him captured hearts. There's sincerity in the way he plays. There's longing even. You realize something quietly unsettling. He probably loved each of his wives, at first. Intensity is his pattern. He doesn't enter halfway. He commits fully, dramatically, publicly. And when that intensity cools, it doesn't fade gently. It shifts. The music ends. Applause fills the hall, genuine and relieved. Henry returns to his seat, energized by admiration. He looks at you expectantly. You praise the performance, truthfully, because it was good. But you keep your tone measured. Enthusiastic, but not overwhelming. Appreciative, but not worshipful. Balance is survival. As the evening continues, you feel the strange duality of the man beside you. He is capable of beauty, of art, of refinement, and also capable of absolute rupture. It's this contrast that makes him compelling and dangerous. Because the same intensity that writes love songs can also rewrite laws. The same passion that fills a hall with music can fill a courtroom with accusations. As another cup of wine is poured, one realization settles quietly in your mind. You are not dating a villain. You are dating a force, and forces are not known for moderation. By now, the evening has settled into something that looks almost normal. Wine flows more freely. Laughter feels less forced. The musicians play lighter tunes. The court resumes its usual rhythm of subtle competition and strategic flattery. And yet, there are more people at this table than you can see. Catherine of Aragon sits quietly in memory, the devoted queen who once ruled at Henry's side and even governed England while he campaigned abroad. Loyal, respected, eventually inconvenient. Anne Boleyn lingers too, sharp, charismatic, ambitious, once adored beyond reason, once elevated beyond expectation, and then, abruptly, accused beyond defence. You don't mention them. No one does. But their absence is structural. You feel it in the way courtiers choose their words, in the way certain subjects bend the conversation away from danger, in the way history has been carefully edited around the king's comfort. Because here's the thing about dating Henry VIII. You are never just competing with the present. You are negotiating with the past. Each former queen represents a lesson. Be loyal, but not politically threatening. Be intelligent, but not divisive. Be charming, but not too influential. Be indispensable, but never irreplaceable. It's a delicate equation. Henry leans back in his chair, comfortable now, expansive again. He gestures as he speaks of the future, of England's strength, of legacy, of stability, and you realise something chillingly practical. His previous marriages were not romantic failures in his mind. They were strategic miscalculations. Corrected. You glance down the table and notice how certain nobles avoid direct eye contact with you. Not unkindly, cautiously. They are not evaluating whether you and Henry share chemistry. They are evaluating whether aligning with you would be wise. Because if you rise, they rise. If you fall, they must fall away quickly. This is not just courtship. It is structural repositioning. As the candles flicker lower and the night deepens, one truth becomes unavoidable. You are not seated beside a man with a complicated romantic history. You are seated beside a man who reshapes his world when it does not fit his expectations. And you are currently part of that world, which makes this less of a date and more of a potential pivot point in English history. After the music fades and the final course is cleared, Henry rises again, this time with a certain decisiveness. A walk. The hall parts instinctively. Torches are lit along the palace corridors. The night air beyond the great doors is cool, crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and trimmed hedges. You step into the gardens beside him. Hampton Court at night is strangely beautiful. Symmetrical hedges stretch into darkness. Fountains murmur softly. The torchlight casts long shadows that make statues look almost alive. It should feel romantic, and it does, in a slightly high-stakes way. Henry walks with measured confidence, hands clasped behind his back. Without the entire court staring, his presence feels less theatrical, but no less commanding. He speaks of destiny, of England's place in Europe, of how history remembers strong rulers, of how weakness invites chaos. There is no overt pressure in his words, just implication. You respond carefully, offering admiration for stability, wisdom, continuity, all the safest words in the Tudor vocabulary. You avoid opinions, you avoid bold declarations, you avoid phrases that could be interpreted as disagreement. You have become diplomatically charming. It's impressive, honestly. As you pass beneath an archway of climbing ivy, he pauses, turns slightly toward you, studies you again, that same assessing gaze from earlier, but deeper now. This is the private part of the evening, or as private as anything gets with guards stationed discreetly at the perimeter. He seems almost reflective, almost vulnerable. You catch a glimpse of something beneath the armour of authority, a man who believes deeply that he is chosen, that his reign must be secured at all costs. And that belief makes everything heavier, because conviction, when paired with power, does not bend easily. The walk slows, the torches flicker, the silence stretches just long enough to feel intentional. And you realise this is the turning point. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just a quiet moment where he decides whether you fit. Not his heart, his narrative. As you return toward the palace doors, one thought settles calmly in your mind. The garden is beautiful, but the real maze tonight is the king. By the time you return inside, the atmosphere has shifted again. The public performance is over. The banquet has concluded. The music has softened into background noise. Most of the court has withdrawn, though not far. Never far. Now comes the quiet part. Henry resumes his seat, but this time he leans back, studying you with less spectacle and more scrutiny. The laughter has faded. The warmth is still present, but focused. This is the evaluation phase. He asks fewer questions now. Instead, he observes how you hold yourself, how you respond to pauses, whether you appear nervous, whether you overcompensate. You realize something uncomfortable. This is not about charm anymore. It is about sustainability. Can you exist beside him without challenging him? Can you elevate his image without overshadowing it? Can you provide loyalty without ambition? The balance required is almost mathematical. You feel the weight of his expectations pressing gently but steadily. He speaks again of England's future, not with grand gestures this time, but with quiet certainty. He believes his role is divinely reinforced, that his decisions are not merely personal preferences, but necessary corrections for the realm. And here is the paradox. He does not think of himself as unreasonable. He thinks of himself as justified. That is what makes him dangerous. Not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but conviction paired with authority. You nod at the right moments, offer thoughtful but restrained responses. Allow him space to lead the direction of every subject. Inside, however, your mind is clear. This is not about whether you like him. It is about whether you can survive him. Because proximity to power always requires compromise. The question is how much. As another cup of wine is poured and the final candles burn lower, you sense that a decision is forming behind his calm expression. He does not rush. He never rushes. But Henry VIII is a man who makes choices decisively once his mind is settled. And tonight, you are the variable in his equation. The air feels heavier, not with romance, with possibility. And in Tudor England, possibility is rarely neutral. There is a moment, brief, dangerous, when it almost feels real. Not political, not strategic, not calculated, just real. Henry's tone softens slightly. The intensity recedes just enough to reveal something quieter underneath. He speaks of youth, of the early years of his reign, when everything felt expansive and promising, when alliances were easy, when admiration was effortless. For a flicker of a second, you see the version of him that history almost forgets. The scholar, the athlete, the man who genuinely believed he would be remembered as a golden ruler. It is strangely human. And that is the most disarming part, because monsters are easy to navigate, tyrants are simple in their brutality, but complex men, they are harder. You find yourself understanding him more than you expected. The pressure, the expectation, the constant need to secure legacy, the weight of a crown that never fully lifts. And then you remember something critical. Understanding does not equal safety. The softness fades as quickly as it appeared. The king straightens slightly, composure reassembled. The vulnerability, if it existed at all, is sealed behind authority once more. The almost disappears. You realize that what you glimpsed was not weakness. It was context. Henry is not chaotic without reason. He is driven, relentlessly, by legacy, image, destiny. Every relationship bends toward that central axis. Even this one. He studies you again, not with warmth, not with suspicion, but with quiet conclusion forming behind his eyes. You are aware now that the evening has reached its invisible end. No dramatic declarations, no grand romantic gestures, just assessment. The most unsettling part? You are not sure whether you hope he is impressed or indifferent. Because if he is impressed, your life changes permanently. If he is indifferent, you walk away quietly into safety. The tension lies not in rejection, but in selection. As the final torches dim and the court prepares to disperse, one truth feels sharper than ever. In Henry's world, affection is temporary, but consequences are not. And you are standing at the edge of both. The evening does not end with a declaration. There is no dramatic proposal, no sweeping gesture, no kneeling monarch promising eternal devotion under torchlight. Henry does not operate in theatrics when it comes to decisions. He operates in silence. The final moments unfold with unsettling normalcy. A final exchange of pleasantries, a measured smile, a compliment that feels carefully placed rather than spontaneous. He thanks you for your company. His tone is warm, but controlled. You curtsy once more, perfectly balanced between grace and restraint. Not too eager, not too distant. He holds your gaze just long enough to suggest that something has shifted. You realize that in this court, approval is rarely announced publicly. It reveals itself through small changes in access. Invitations extended, positions offered, alliances formed. If you are summoned again, you will know. If you are not, you will also know. The power of Henry's interest lies not in what he says, but in what he does next. As you are escorted back through the corridors, the palace feels different. Less overwhelming, more calculated. You now understand its rhythm. This place does not reward spontaneity. It rewards alignment. Alignment with the king's needs, with his vision, with his version of destiny. Outside, the night air feels sharper, cooler, honest. You step into your carriage with careful composure, aware that eyes still follow your departure. Courtiers are already speculating, calculating how tonight might alter the political landscape. Because in Tudor England, romance is rarely personal. It is structural. As the carriage rolls away from Hampton Court, one thought anchors itself firmly in your mind. You have survived the first evening, which, given the circumstances, is impressive. But survival is only step one. The real question is whether you will be invited back. And if you are, whether you should accept. Morning arrives with unsettling normalcy. No trumpets, no urgent messengers pounding at your door, no royal decree sealed in dramatic wax, just sunlight, which honestly feels like a small victory. You wake and immediately conduct a silent inventory. You are alive. You have not been accused of anything. You have not accidentally declared loyalty to the wrong theological faction. Promising start. But Tudor England does not operate on immediate consequences. It operates on delay. The real outcome of last night will unfold quietly. By midday, subtle signals begin to circulate. A courtier who was distant yesterday now greets you warmly. A lady-in-waiting lingers just slightly longer in conversation. Someone mentions, casually, that His Majesty seemed most pleased with the evening. That phrase again. Pleased. Not enchanted, not smitten. Pleased. Which in royal language could mean anything from mild approval to prepare the wedding tapestries. You replay the night in your mind, every word, every pause, every measured nod. Did you laugh too little? Too much? Did you respond to the succession conversation with the right balance of loyalty and non-threatening optimism? You realise something uncomfortable. Dating Henry VIII is less about romance and more about post-event analysis. Meanwhile, London whispers. Rumours travel faster than horses. By afternoon, you are either the king's newest fascination or simply a pleasant dinner companion. And in this era, those two categories are dangerously close. There is an odd stillness in waiting, because the next move will not be yours, it will be his. If another invitation arrives, your life pivots permanently. Your future becomes entangled with succession, politics, and the delicate art of staying indispensable but never threatening. If silence follows, you return quietly to safety. And here lies the irony. You are not sure which outcome is more appealing. Power is intoxicating. But so is anonymity. As the day fades and no official summons appears, yet one thought lingers with dry clarity. You went on a date with Henry VIII. You survived. And in Tudor England, that alone qualifies as a successful first impression. Whether you should aim for a second one is another matter entirely. Before there were written languages, before stone temples rose against the sky, there was breath moving through bone. In the caves of what is now Swabian Jura, archaeologists uncovered some of the oldest known musical instruments on Earth. Flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory. These were not crude noisemakers. They were carefully shaped, with finger holes placed at measured intervals. Someone understood pitch. Someone experimented with sound. Imagine the scene. A fire flickers against limestone walls painted with animals. Outside, the Ice Age world is vast and dangerous. Inside, a person lifts a hollow bone to their lips and exhales. A clear tone fills the darkness. That moment changes everything. The earliest humans already knew rhythm. They heard it in footsteps, in heartbeat, in the pounding of tools against stone. But melody, controlled, intentional melody, required invention. It required curiosity about how air vibrates, how hollow chambers amplify, how different lengths produce different notes. The act of carving a flute suggests planning. It suggests listening closely to the world and asking a simple but profound question. What if I could shape this sound? Music likely began as imitation. Wind through reeds, birdsong echoing at dawn, the howl of animals across open plains. Early humans did not separate themselves from nature, they echoed it. The flute allowed them to participate in that soundscape, not just observe it. But it also did something deeper. It turned breath, the invisible sign of life, into something shareable. Breath became tone. Tone became pattern. Pattern became expression. In caves, music may have accompanied ritual. The walls were not empty. They were canvases of bison, horses, and deer. Sound in such a space would have reverberated dramatically, transforming the cave into a natural amplifier. A single note could feel vast, almost supernatural. These first instruments were portable. They travelled with their makers. They carried memory from one camp to another. Long before writing preserved stories, sound carried them. The origin of musical instruments was not entertainment. It was human beings discovering that the air inside their lungs could shape emotion in the air around them. If breath shaped melody, the body shaped rhythm. Long before flutes sang in caves, humans were already striking surfaces. Hands against chests, feet against earth, sticks against hollow logs. Rhythm required no carving, no drilling, no delicate craftsmanship. It required only repetition. The drum is one of the oldest instruments, not because it survives well in the archaeological record, skins and wood decay, but because it emerges naturally wherever humans gather. A stretched hide over a frame transforms impact into resonance. A hollow tree trunk amplifies a strike into something communal. In early societies, rhythm likely came first. It is primal. The heartbeat is rhythm. The sound of running feet is rhythm. Thunder is rhythm. Even speech has cadence before it has melody. Humans are wired to respond to repetition. It organizes movement. It synchronizes bodies. In ritual contexts, rhythm binds groups together. Anthropologists studying traditional societies across Africa, Asia, and the Americas observe a common pattern. Drums lead ceremony. They call participants into shared tempo. They dissolve individuality into collective pulse. The power of rhythm lies in its physicality. Unlike melody, which floats and varies, rhythm grounds. A deep drum beat can be felt in the chest. It vibrates through skin and bone. It demands response. Early drums may have been simple frame drums or slit drums carved from logs. In parts of Africa, ancient traditions of wooden drums survive today. In Asia, early bronze drums, such as the Dong Son drums, demonstrate how rhythm became embedded in cultural identity. But the earliest rhythms needed no metal or ornamentation. A skin stretched over a wooden frame was enough. Imagine a circle of people under open sky. Firelight flickers. A steady beat begins. One person strikes. Another joins. Feet move in time. Voices rise. Rhythm turns scattered individuals into a unit. Where melody might express longing or grief, rhythm commands action. It coordinates hunting, rowing, marching. It prepares warriors and welcomes newborns. It marks transitions, from child to adult, from life to death. Before music became art, it was structure. And at the foundation of that structure was the drum, simple, direct, and deeply human. If rhythm grounded early music and breath carried melody, tension gave sound a new dimension. At some point, someone plucked a stretched string and noticed the vibration lingered. The sound was different from a drum or a flute. It shimmered. It resonated. It could be tightened or loosened to change pitch. From this simple observation emerged the ancestors of harps and lyres. In ancient Mesopotamia, some of the earliest depictions of stringed instruments appear in art and burial sites. The famous lyres discovered in the royal cemetery of Ur reveal instruments crafted with remarkable sophistication. Wooden frames, carefully stretched strings, decorative inlays. These were not casual tools. They were objects of status and ceremony. The principle was simple. A string under tension vibrates at a predictable pitch. Change the length or tightness, and the pitch changes. But the implications were vast. Unlike flutes, which depend on breath, or drums, which rely on impact, stringed instruments introduced harmony. Multiple strings could sound together. Notes could layer. Music gained depth. The harp likely evolved from the hunting bow. A bowstring twangs when released. Hunters would have heard its vibration countless times. It takes only curiosity to ask, what if I add more strings? What if I attach them to a resonating body? With that question, sound moved from survival tool to artistic instrument. In Mesopotamian culture, music was deeply tied to religion and royal life. Temple musicians played stringed instruments in rituals honoring gods. Court performers accompanied poetry and epic recitations. The instrument became voice-like, capable of subtle emotional shifts. String tension also mirrored human experience. Tighten the string too much, and it snaps. Leave it too loose, and it produces no clear tone. Balance is everything. That balance allowed musicians to express something new. Complexity. A plucked string can sing softly or sharply. It can sustain or dampen. It can accompany a voice or stand alone. With strings, music moved closer to narrative. Where drums united bodies and flutes echoed breath, harps told stories. And in the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia, sound became not only communal or ritual, but art refined by craft, intention, and emotion. If strings brought harmony and drums brought power, wind instruments brought authority. As civilizations grew more complex, so did their soundscapes. In ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, reed pipes and early oboes began to appear in temple art and royal ceremonies. These instruments were louder, sharper, and more commanding than the soft cave flute of prehistory. Unlike the gentle bone flutes of Ice Age Europe, double reed instruments produced piercing tones capable of cutting through open air and crowded gatherings. Their sound demanded attention. In Egypt, musicians played long reed pipes during religious rituals honoring deities like Hathor, associated with music and joy. Temple walls depict ensembles of harpists and wind players performing in structured settings. Music had moved from firelit caves to organized sacred space. Wind instruments also evolved in East Asia. In ancient China, bamboo pipes and mouth organs emerged, including early versions of the sheng, which allowed multiple notes to sound at once. Here again, breath became architecture, air passing through carefully designed chambers to produce layered tones. The material shift mattered. Wood, reed, bone, and eventually metal allowed stronger resonance and durability. Bronze trumpets appeared in various ancient cultures, including the Celtic carnix in Europe, designed not for melody, but for intimidation. Its animal-headed bell amplified sound into something almost monstrous. Sound now had purpose beyond expression. Wind instruments signaled armies. They announced ceremonies. They accompanied sacrifice and coronation. A single blast could command movement or silence. Breath remained central, but now breath was magnified. What once echoed softly in caves now echoed across temples and battlefields. The human lung had always carried emotion. With advanced wind instruments, it carried authority. And yet, beneath the ceremony and spectacle, the core remained unchanged. A person inhaled. A person exhaled. Air vibrated. From bone flute to bronze trumpet, wind instruments preserved something intimate within something grand. They reminded early civilizations that even in towering temples and vast empires, music still began with a simple act, breathing life into sound. As instruments evolved, so did their meaning. In early civilizations, music was not merely entertainment, it was communication, not just between people, but between humans and the divine. Sound was believed to travel where words could not. In ancient Sumer, temple musicians served in organized roles. Hymns were performed daily for gods like Inanna, accompanied by lyres and drums. These performances were not optional adornments to ritual. They were ritual. The vibration of strings, the pulse of drums, the breath through pipes, all were thought to create harmony between heaven and earth. In ancient Egypt, music was woven deeply into religious life. The sistrum, a rattle-like instrument associated with Isis, was shaken during ceremonies to invoke protection and divine presence. The instrument's metallic shimmer was believed to please the gods and ward off chaos. Sound was never neutral. Certain tones were linked to specific deities, certain rhythms marked specific rites, music structured time, sunrise hymns, funeral laments, harvest celebrations. Life's transitions were marked not just with speech, but with carefully chosen instruments. In ancient Greece, philosophy and music intertwined. Thinkers like Pythagoras explored the mathematical relationships between string lengths and harmonious intervals. Harmony was not only aesthetic, it was cosmic. The music of the spheres described the belief that celestial bodies moved according to musical ratios, producing a divine, though inaudible, symphony. Music thus became a model for universal order. Across cultures, sacred music shared common traits: repetition, structure, resonance. The drum beat aligned with heartbeat. The chant aligned with breath. Instruments amplified collective emotion into something transcendent. To ancient ears, sound could cleanse, summon, heal, and transform. It bridged the invisible. Before theology was written in books, it was sung. Before philosophy was recorded, it was accompanied by strings. The origin of musical instruments cannot be separated from spirituality. From the earliest bone flute in a cave to temple harps beneath carved pillars, humans used instruments to reach beyond themselves. They believed that somewhere, in vibration and tone, the divine might answer back. As music deepened its spiritual roots, it also climbed the steps of power. In growing kingdoms and empires, instruments became symbols of authority, refinement, and cultural identity. Sound no longer belonged only to ritual spaces. It belonged to courts, palaces, and public ceremony. In ancient China, music was considered essential to good governance. Philosophers like Confucius believed that harmonious music reflected a harmonious state. Court orchestras performed with strict structure, using bells, zithers, flutes, and drums, arranged according to cosmic principles. Disorderly music, Confucius argued, signaled moral decay. Music became political philosophy in audible form. In the courts of ancient Greece, the lyre and kithara were instruments of education and status. Young aristocrats were expected to learn music alongside rhetoric and athletics. Mastery of strings demonstrated discipline and cultural refinement. To be musical was to be civilized. Meanwhile, in Rome, music accompanied triumphs, gladiatorial games, and state ceremonies. Trumpets signaled processions. Drums structured military movement. Instruments shaped public spectacle and reinforced hierarchy. Across regions, royal courts sponsored musicians, refined instrument design, and established professional performers. What began as communal expression evolved into specialized craft. Luthiers perfected string tension. Metalworkers shaped horns for clarity and volume. Musicians trained rigorously to meet courtly expectations. Sound began to represent not only emotion or devotion, but prestige. Instruments themselves became art objects. Harps were decorated with gold leaf. Lyres featured carved animal heads. Drums were painted with symbolic motifs. Ownership signaled wealth. Performance signaled patronage. Yet even in palaces, the essence remained ancient. A musician still relied on breath, tension, or impact. The difference was context. Instead of echoing through caves, music now echoed through marble halls. It affirmed identity. Each civilization cultivated distinct tonal systems and preferred instruments. Music differentiated cultures as clearly as language or clothing. By this stage in human history, musical instruments had become more than tools. They were voices of empire, declaring who held power, who shaped order, and how a society understood harmony itself. As trade routes stretched across continents, instruments began to travel. Merchants carried silk, spices, and precious metals, but they also carried melodies. Along the vast network of the Silk Road, instruments moved from one civilization to another, adapting along the way. A stringed instrument born in Mesopotamia could evolve into new forms in Persia, Central Asia, and eventually East Asia. The lute, for example, likely traces its ancestry to ancient long-necked string instruments of the Near East. Over centuries, it transformed. In Persia, it became the barbat. In the Islamic world, it evolved into the oud. Later, it would influence the European lute, and eventually the modern guitar. Sound does not respect borders. Wind instruments travelled as well. Reed pipes and flutes shifted shape depending on available materials and local musical scales. In China, the pipa, originally influenced by Central Asian lutes, became a central instrument in imperial music. Cultural exchange reshaped both form and technique. Even drums crossed distances. Frame drums appeared in various forms from the Middle East to Europe. Their structure was simple enough to replicate, yet flexible enough to adapt to different musical traditions. Trade created hybrid sounds. When cultures encountered one another, they did not simply copy instruments, they modified them. Tunings shifted to fit new tonal systems. Decorations reflected local art. Performance styles changed to suit new rituals and aesthetics. The spread of instruments also spread musical ideas. Scale systems, rhythmic patterns and performance techniques intertwined. What began as regional expression gradually became interconnected human heritage. This exchange was not always peaceful. Conquest and empire often accelerated musical diffusion. When armies moved, musicians sometimes moved with them. Court ensembles incorporated foreign instruments as symbols of cosmopolitan power. Yet beneath politics and commerce, something more fundamental was happening. Humans were discovering that emotion sounded similar across cultures. Joy, grief, longing, celebration. These required no translation. Instruments evolved because people listened to one another. The origins of musical instruments were rooted in survival and ritual. But as civilizations connected, instruments became ambassadors. They carried stories without words. They proved that while languages divide, vibration unites. And in the shared act of shaping sound, humanity quietly acknowledged its common rhythm. For most of human history, music lived only in memory. A melody survived because someone remembered it. A rhythm endured because it was repeated. Instruments carried sound across generations, but there was always fragility. If a tradition broke, the music could vanish. Then came an extraordinary shift, the attempt to write sound down. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets from the city of Ugarit contain what may be the oldest known written musical notation. These tablets describe hymns accompanied by lyres using cuneiform symbols to indicate tuning and performance instructions. The system was complex and still debated by scholars, but its intention is clear. Music was becoming recordable. In ancient Greece, musicians developed alphabetic notation systems that marked pitch above lines of poetry. Philosophers such as Aristoxenus analysed intervals and scales, attempting to understand music not just emotionally, but scientifically. Sound was no longer purely ephemeral. In China, court music during early dynasties was documented carefully. The classification of instruments, strings, winds, percussion, reflected cosmological thinking. Music theory intertwined with philosophy, linking tones to seasons, elements, and moral order. Writing music changed instruments as well. Once sound could be preserved symbolically, compositions could grow more intricate. Musicians could perform the same piece across time and space with consistency. Instruments were refined to match standardized scales. Craftsmanship responded to theory. But something was lost too. Oral traditions are flexible. They breathe and evolve. Written music anchors sound in fixed form. It allows preservation, but it also limits variation. Still, the desire to capture music reveals something profound. Humans did not want sound to disappear. They wanted to revisit it, teach it, perfect it. The origins of musical instruments began with breath, rhythm, and tension. Now they entered a new era, one where vibration could be translated into symbol. Music stepped closer to permanence. And in doing so, it ensured that the earliest human impulse, to shape sound into meaning, would echo far beyond a single lifetime. From a hollow bone in a cave to complex court orchestras, musical instruments have followed humanity through every stage of its development. But beneath all the evolution, materials, craftsmanship, theory, notation, the core question remains the same. Why did we feel the need to make music at all? Early humans did not carve flutes because they were bored. They lived in harsh conditions, where survival demanded energy and focus. Yet even there, in cold caves and open plains, they shaped sound deliberately. That decision tells us something essential. Music is not a luxury of civilization. It is a function of being human. Instruments allowed people to extend the body's natural capabilities. The voice can only reach so far. A horn carries farther. Hands can only strike so loud. A drum magnifies impact. Fingers can only hum a single tone. Strings multiply harmony. Instruments are amplifiers of emotion. Across continents, from Mesopotamia to China to Greece, music evolved independently, yet followed similar paths. Rhythm, melody, harmony, ritual, performance, identity. That pattern suggests something universal. Humans crave structure in sound. We respond instinctively to tempo. We feel tension resolve when harmony aligns. Even without formal training, the body reacts. Music organizes emotion. It marks time. It accompanies labor. It intensifies ceremony. It comforts grief. It celebrates victory. It binds communities and distinguishes cultures. It turns private feeling into shared experience. The invention of musical instruments was not about technology alone. It was about control over the invisible. Sound cannot be held in the hand, but it can be shaped. It exists for a moment, then fades. Yet in that brief vibration, meaning is created. And perhaps that is why instruments endured. Empires fell, languages vanished, scripts were forgotten. But rhythm, breath, and tension remained. The first flute maker could not have imagined symphonies or concert halls, but they understood something profound, that the air around them could carry feeling. The origins of musical instruments reveal not just history, but identity. To be human is to listen. To be human is to shape what we hear. And to be human is to turn sound into art. The English word paradise does not begin in heaven. It begins in dust. Long before it appeared in sacred scripture or medieval paintings of angels, it lived in the old Persian word paradisa, meaning a walled enclosure, not clouds, not harps, walls. On the Iranian plateau, the environment was rarely gentle. Summers were blistering. Winds carried sand across open plains. Beyond cultivated land stretched harsh terrain that reminded every traveller how fragile comfort truly was. In such a world, a wall did more than divide space. It created meaning. Inside the wall, order, shade, water, fruit, geometry. Outside the wall, heat, dryness, unpredictability. This contrast was everything. Under the Achaemenid Empire, especially during the reign of Cyrus the Great, royal gardens became statements of power. To conquer land was impressive. To tame nature was divine. A king who could command water to flow where none naturally ran was not merely a ruler. He was a bringer of harmony. These early gardens were not random clusters of trees. They were carefully planned. The enclosure symbolized control. The layout reflected cosmic order. The act of cultivation represented civilization pushing back against chaos. A Persian garden was not meant to imitate wilderness. It was meant to correct it. Water was the heart of the design. In desert regions, water was life, status, and miracle combined. When channels cut through dry soil and trees flourished where nothing should grow, visitors understood immediately. This was a place of power. This was an oasis shaped by human intention, and intention mattered deeply in Persian thought. The garden embodied a philosophical idea that the world, though often chaotic, could be arranged into balance. Geometry replaced randomness, shade replaced glare, still pools replaced dust storms. When later cultures encountered these enclosed gardens, they did not just borrow the layout. They borrowed the concept. The word paradisa travelled through languages, becoming the Greek paradisos, and eventually the paradise of religious imagination. But its origin remained grounded in earth and stone. Paradise was never originally about escape from the world. It was about mastering it. If walls created paradise, water made it believable. On the Iranian plateau, rainfall was unreliable and rivers were scarce. To grow a garden in such conditions was not romantic. It was an engineering challenge, and the Persians solved it with quiet brilliance. Beneath the surface of the earth ran one of the ancient world's most ingenious systems, the Qanat. These underground channels carried water from distant mountain aquifers across miles of arid land, using gravity alone. No pumps, no engines, just careful calculation and patient excavation. The result was astonishing. Water emerged gently into settlements and royal enclosures, cool and clean from its journey beneath the desert. Where there had been dust, there was suddenly flow. Under rulers like Darius the Great, hydraulic mastery became a form of imperial propaganda. Inscriptions boasted not only of conquered lands but of cultivated ones. The message was subtle but powerful. The king did not merely destroy and dominate, he nourished. In a Persian garden, water was never hidden. It was displayed. Channels divided the space into symmetrical quadrants, often forming a cross-like pattern that later influenced Islamic garden design. These divisions were not random decoration. They represented order imposed upon the landscape, a visible geometry of control. Water moved slowly through shallow stone-lined rills. It pooled into reflective basins. It shimmered in sunlight. The sound alone transformed the experience. In a silent desert, the soft murmur of flowing water felt almost supernatural. This was not excess. It was symbolism. Water meant survival. To waste it was unthinkable. So its presence inside garden walls communicated abundance without extravagance. The channels were precise. The distribution balanced. Nothing chaotic. Even the temperature changed. Flowing water cooled the air. Shade trees planted along its path created microclimates that allowed fruit trees, cypress, and flowering plants to thrive. The garden became a refuge not just spiritually, but physically. Outside the walls, the desert still burned. Inside, there was movement, sound, and life. The miracle of the Persian garden was not that it defied nature. It was that it understood nature, and then redirected it with patience, mathematics, and vision. And if water gave the garden life, geometry gave it meaning. Persian gardens were not designed to wander. They were designed to align. Straight lines cut across the earth with deliberate clarity. Paths intersected at right angles. Water channels divided the enclosure into balanced sections. Everything pointed towards symmetry. This design eventually became known as the Chahar Bagh, the four gardens. The layout divided the space into four equal quadrants, usually separated by watercourses or walkways that met at a central point. At that intersection might stand a pavilion, a platform, or a pool, the symbolic heart of the garden. The number 4 was not arbitrary. In ancient cosmology, the world itself was often described as divided into 4 parts, 4 rivers, 4 corners of the earth, 4 directions. To structure a garden in this way was to mirror the universe in miniature. The Persians were not simply arranging plants, they were recreating order. Under the Achaemenid Empire, especially in royal centres like Pasargadae, this geometric precision became architectural philosophy. The garden extended the palace extended the king extended divine harmony. The logic was seamless. Walking through such a space, a visitor did not experience randomness. Every line guided the eye. Every tree appeared intentionally placed. Cypress trees often marked vertical stability, tall, dark, and enduring. Fruit trees symbolized renewal and abundance. Flower beds introduced fragrance and color without breaking symmetry. Even pathways reinforced hierarchy. The main axis was wide and direct, leading toward the central pavilion. Secondary paths were narrower, more intimate. Movement through the garden subtly reflected movement through society. Structured, intentional, ordered. Shade was arranged strategically. Light and shadow alternated rhythmically. Pools reflected sky and architecture, doubling the illusion of space and balance. The desert beyond the walls remained irregular and unpredictable. Sand shifted. Wind reshaped dunes. Nothing held its form for long, but inside the Persian garden, form endured. Geometry was not merely aesthetic preference, it was philosophical resistance against chaos. By dividing space into equal parts, by aligning Earth with invisible cosmic principles, the Persians transformed land into statement. Paradise, in this vision, was not wild beauty, it was disciplined harmony. If geometry shaped the skeleton of the Persian garden, trees gave it soul. Planting a tree in arid soil was an act of faith. Keeping it alive was an act of discipline. Choosing which tree to plant was an act of symbolism. The tall, slender cypress became one of the most recognizable features of Persian gardens. Evergreen and upright, it symbolized endurance and immortality. Unlike deciduous trees, it did not shed its identity with the seasons. It stood firm, vertical against the horizon, a living column echoing palace architecture. Beside it, fruit trees softened the severity. Pomegranates, figs, almonds and quince offered sweetness in a harsh landscape. The pomegranate in particular carried deep resonance. Its many seeds represented fertility, life, and continuity. To walk beneath its branches was to move under a promise of renewal. Shade was not decorative, it was essential. In desert climates, shade meant survival. Carefully planted rows of trees cooled the air, protected delicate flowers, and made long walks possible even in summer heat. The garden was engineered to create microclimates, pockets of comfort carved out of extremity. Under rulers like Xerxes I, royal estates expanded this botanical vision. Imported species were cultivated as signs of imperial reach. Trees from distant provinces grew side by side, quietly reflecting the vastness of Persian territory. The garden became a living map of conquest, not through violence, but through cultivation. Fragrance also mattered. Roses, jasmine, and other flowering plants were arranged to release scent gradually through the day. Morning carried one perfume, evening carried another. The sensory experience was layered, intentional. Birds were drawn to the trees, their songs blended with the sound of flowing water. Movement appeared natural, but nothing was accidental. Even apparent wildness existed within boundaries. The contrast remained constant. Beyond the walls, sparse scrub and open heat. Inside, layered canopies and deliberate abundance. Trees anchored the space vertically, balancing the horizontal precision of water channels and pathways. They framed views, softened architecture, and created rhythm within symmetry. The Persian garden was not a chaotic forest. It was a curated sanctuary. Every trunk, branch, and blossom contributed to the same message. Life can flourish, even in the desert, when guided by intention. By now, the Persian garden was no longer just landscape. It was stage. Kings did not rule only from stone halls. They ruled from shaded pavilions where water shimmered and cypress trees stood like silent guards. The garden became an extension of authority, a throne room without walls, yet perfectly enclosed. In places like Persepolis, architecture and cultivated land blurred into one statement. The palace terraces overlooked ordered greenery. Visitors approaching the king would pass through layers of symmetry before ever seeing him. Geometry prepared the mind. Water calmed the senses. Shade softened the heat. By the time one stood before the ruler, the message had already been delivered. This man commands harmony. The Persian monarch was often portrayed as the guarantor of cosmic order. In Zoroastrian thought, the world was a battleground between order and chaos, truth and falsehood. The king's role was not merely administrative, it was moral and cosmic. A well-kept garden mirrored this responsibility. To sit at the center of a Chahar Bagh layout was to place oneself at the heart of the universe. 4 directions radiating outward, water flowing evenly, life distributed with balance. The symbolism was subtle, but unmistakable. Diplomacy happened here. Banquets were hosted here. Foreign envoys walked through carefully curated spaces designed to impress without overt extravagance. The quiet confidence of flowing water spoke louder than gold. Even hunting parks, larger enclosed landscapes stocked with game, were extensions of this idea. The Greeks who encountered them used the word paradisos to describe these royal enclosures. They saw more than gardens. They saw controlled wilderness, curated nature shaped by imperial will. And yet, for all its political weight, the garden was also intimate. Families walked its paths. Conversations unfolded beneath pomegranate branches. Poets would later describe gardens as places where the earthly and the divine briefly touched. This duality was essential. The Persian garden was both public power and private retreat. It demonstrated dominance over nature, yet offered softness and refuge. In a land defined by extremes, the garden created a middle space, not desert, not palace interior, but something balanced between. A place where authority felt natural, a place where paradise and power quietly became the same thing. Ideas travel more easily than armies. When the forces of Alexander the Great swept through the Persian Empire, they carried away more than treasure. They carried concepts. Among them was the Persian garden, enclosed, symmetrical, watered with intention. The Greeks adopted the word paradisos to describe royal parks and hunting reserves, but the deeper structure of the Persian garden did not remain confined to the Hellenistic world. As empires rose and fell across the Middle East, the garden moved with them. Under Islamic dynasties, especially from the 7th century onward, the Persian concept merged with Quranic imagery. Paradise in Islamic tradition is described as a garden beneath which rivers flow. 4 rivers, in fact. The symbolism aligned almost perfectly with the Chaharbagh layout. What had once been royal landscaping became sacred metaphor. The Safavid Empire revived and refined Persian garden aesthetics centuries later, especially in cities like Isfahan. Grand avenues lined with trees and water channels extended the garden idea into urban planning itself. The city became a garden. Order expanded beyond walls. Further east, the concept flourished magnificently under the Mughal Empire in South Asia. Gardens like those surrounding the Taj Mahal are direct descendants of Persian design. Symmetrical quadrants, central water axis, reflection pools doubling sky and monument. The garden crossed cultures because its symbolism was universal. Everywhere, humans understood the appeal of carving order from harshness. Whether desert, steppe, or crowded city, the promise of structured greenery resonated. Even European Renaissance gardens, with their geometric layouts and water features, echo faintly with Persian ancestry. The language may have changed, the climates differed, but the underlying principle remained: paradise is designed. What began as a walled enclosure on the Iranian plateau became a global architectural philosophy. Across centuries and continents, the Persian garden proved adaptable yet consistent. It was never merely decorative. It was a worldview expressed in soil and stone. A reminder that even when empires collapse, certain ideas endure, especially the idea that paradise can be built. By this point, the Persian garden was more than walls, water, and trees. It was atmosphere. Paradise was not meant to be viewed only with the eyes. It was meant to be felt. Sound played a central role. In a desert environment, silence can feel overwhelming, broken only by wind. Inside the garden walls, that silence transformed. Water did not rush violently. It moved gently, gliding through narrow stone channels, spilling softly into basins. The rhythm was controlled, almost musical. The sound of flowing water masked harsh winds. It cooled the mind before it cooled the skin. It created the illusion of abundance in a landscape defined by scarcity. Birdsong followed naturally. Trees attracted life. Their branches became perches, their fruit an invitation. What seemed spontaneous was carefully enabled. The garden became a living orchestra of subtle movement. Light, too, was managed with precision. The high desert sun can be brutal. Persian designers understood how to soften it. Rows of trees created alternating bands of shadow and brightness. As one walked along a pathway, the body moved through patterns of light. Cool shade, warm sun, shade again. This rhythm slowed movement. It encouraged reflection. Reflecting pools multiplied the sky. A shallow basin mirrored clouds and architecture, making the enclosure feel larger than it was. Water blurred the boundary between earth and heaven. The horizon seemed closer. The space felt infinite. Pavilions were often placed at focal points, offering framed views along the garden's main axis. When seated within them, one could look outward and see perfectly aligned channels extending in all directions. Geometry guided the gaze toward vanishing points that suggested endless continuity. Even fragrance contributed to the illusion. Roses released scent gradually under sunlight. Jasmine intensified at dusk. The garden shifted subtly throughout the day, as though it possessed its own breathing rhythm. Nothing was loud. Nothing was chaotic. The Persian garden did not overwhelm the senses. It harmonized them. In doing so, it achieved something remarkable. It made a finite enclosure feel boundless. Walls disappeared in perception. Water suggested eternity. Reflections implied another world just beneath the surface. Paradise was no longer only a physical space. It became an experience of balance so complete that it momentarily erased the desert beyond the walls. Over time, the Persian garden ceased to be only royal architecture. It became theology in landscape form. In Zoroastrian belief, the universe was shaped by the struggle between order and chaos, truth and falsehood. Humans were not passive observers in this cosmic tension. They were participants. Cultivating land, channeling water, and maintaining balance were moral acts. A well-kept garden reflected alignment with Asher, divine order. This idea deepened as Persian influence blended into Islamic civilization. The Quran repeatedly describes paradise as a garden beneath which rivers flow, shaded, fertile, abundant. The imagery resonated immediately with the Persian Chahar Bagh design. 4 rivers flowing from a central source, shade, fruit without toil, flowing water without drought. What had once been imperial symbolism now became spiritual promise. Gardens were built near mosques, palaces, and tombs. They framed sacred architecture not as ornament, but as extension. The visitor did not simply enter a religious space. They walked through a vision of paradise before reaching it. The Persian garden thus operated on 2 levels simultaneously. On Earth, it was a controlled environment shaped by mathematics and irrigation. In meaning, it was a rehearsal for eternity. Even burial sites adopted the layout. To place a tomb within a symmetrical garden was to situate the deceased at the center of cosmic harmony. The living walked the quadrants. The dead rested at the axis. The symbolism was quiet but profound. The garden's enclosure suggested protection. Its flowing water suggested continuity beyond death. Its symmetry suggested justice and balance. Its shade suggested mercy. Unlike wild forests, which could feel mysterious or threatening, the Persian garden felt comprehensible. It reassured. It implied that the universe, though vast and often harsh, possessed underlying structure, and structure meant hope. The desert beyond the walls still existed. Drought still came. Empires still fell. But inside the garden, there was a reminder that chaos was not the final word. Paradise was not distant. It was modelled in stone and soil. To step into a Persian garden was to step into an argument. That order can be created, sustained, and perhaps even mirrored in the soul. Empires collapsed, capitals shifted, dynasties faded into dust. But the idea of the Persian garden endured. From the terraces of ancient Pasargadae to the later avenues of Isfahan, from Mughal tomb gardens in India to courtyard designs across the Middle East, the concept remained astonishingly consistent. Enclosure, symmetry, water, shade, balance. What changed were materials and scale. What stayed was philosophy. The Persian garden survived because it addressed something universal, the human desire to impose meaning on environment. In harsh climates, this was literal survival. In more temperate lands, it became aesthetic discipline. But everywhere, the message remained the same. Paradise is not wild chaos. It is cultivated harmony. Even today, modern landscape architects echo these principles. Reflecting pools, axial walkways, framed vistas, and enclosed courtyards all trace faint lines back to Paradisa. We may not speak Old Persian, but we still design with its logic. The word paradise has drifted far from its origin. It now evokes distant heavens or perfect vacations. Yet at its root, it referred to something far more grounded, a walled space carved from difficulty, sustained through intelligence and maintained through care. That origin matters. The Persian garden teaches that paradise is not accidental. It requires boundaries. It requires water management. It requires patience. It requires geometry, literal and metaphorical. Beyond the walls, the desert always waited. Heat returned. Seasons shifted. Nothing was permanently secured. The garden demanded upkeep. Neglect would dissolve symmetry into dust. Perhaps that is the final lesson. Paradise is not a reward handed down. It is an ongoing act of balance. The ancient Persians understood this intimately. They did not imagine perfection as escape from the world. They imagined it as refinement of it. Within four walls, crossed by water, shaded by trees, aligned with the cosmos, they created a space where chaos felt distant and order felt tangible. And in doing so, they gave the world not just a design, but a definition. For most of human history, losing your sight did not mean darkness. It meant blur. Edges softened. Letters bled into one another. Faces lost detail. The world did not disappear. It simply retreated beyond clarity. And for centuries, there was nothing to be done about it. In ancient Rome, writers noticed curious properties of glass. The philosopher Seneca remarked that small letters appeared larger when viewed through a globe of water. The Roman Emperor Nero was said to watch gladiatorial games through a polished emerald, perhaps to reduce glare or improve focus. The principle was there. Light could be bent, magnified, altered. But no one yet placed lenses before their eyes as a daily tool. As literacy spread in medieval Europe, the problem became more urgent. In monasteries, monks hunched over manuscripts for hours at a time. Candlelight flickered against vellum. Inked letters demanded precisio, N. Aging scribes often found their vision failing just as their knowledge deepened. Without clear sight, scholarship suffered. The rise of universities in cities like Bologna and Paris intensified the demand for reading. Books, once rare, became more common among scholars. And with them came a quiet crisis. Presbyopia, the natural loss of near focus with age. Glassmaking had improved by the 13th century, especially in regions like northern Italy. Artisans were skilled in shaping clear, convex lenses. These lenses were first used as reading stones, small polished hemispheres placed directly on text to magnify individual lines. It was a breakthrough, but still limited. The reading stone worked only when held against the page. It freed text from blur, but it did not free the hands. The world had discovered that light could be shaped. It understood that curvature altered vision. The science was emerging, even if the language of optics was still primitive. Humanity stood on the edge of a transformation. For the first time, it became possible to imagine something radical. That failing sight was not destiny, that the blur could be corrected, that the way we see the world could, quite literally, be reinvented. By the late 13th century, the blur finally met its rival. In northern Italy, skilled glassmakers had perfected the art of shaping clear convex lenses. Sometime around the 1890s of that century, someone made a simple but revolutionary leap. Instead of placing the lens on the page, why not hold it before the eyes? The earliest eyeglasses were humble. Two small convex lenses were mounted in wooden or metal rims and connected by a rivet in the centre. They did not sit on the nose comfortably, nor did they hook over the ears. They had to be balanced or held in place. Awkward, fragile, and imperfect, yet transformative. These early spectacles were designed primarily to correct presbyopia, helping aging readers focus on close text. They did not address distance vision yet. They were tools for scholars, clerics, merchants, anyone whose livelihood depended on reading. One of the earliest references to eyeglasses appears in a sermon by the Dominican friar Giordano da Pisa in 1306. He mentioned that the invention of spectacles was recent within living memory. That statement alone suggests how rapidly the idea spread. The timing was no coincidence. Europe was entering an age of intellectual expansion. Universities flourished. Manuscript production increased. Literacy among clergy and urban elites grew. Clear sight was becoming economically valuable. Venetian glassmakers, especially those on the island of Murano, played a central role in refining lens quality. Their access to high-quality silica and advanced furnace techniques allowed for clearer, more consistent glass. Venice guarded these secrets closely. Glass was power. The earliest depictions of eyeglasses appear in 14th century paintings, often perched on the noses of saints or scholars. The image conveyed wisdom, age, and learning. Spectacles quickly became associated not with weakness, but with intellect. The social meaning of vision began to shift. To wear glasses was to admit aging eyes, but also to demonstrate dedication to study. They extended productivity. They prolonged scholarship. They delayed decline. For the first time in history, humans could intervene directly in their own perception. Light entered the eye differently. The world sharpened. And knowledge, quite literally, came back into focus. The invention of eyeglasses might have remained a niche tool for aging scholars, if not for another revolution unfolding at the same time. In the mid-15th century, Johannes Gutenberg introduced movable type printing in Mainz. Books, once copied painstakingly by hand, could now be reproduced in greater numbers. Text multiplied. Literacy expanded. And with it, the demand for clear vision surged. The printing press did more than spread ideas. It made eyesight economically critical. Merchants reading contracts, navigators studying charts, accountants balancing ledgers, students poring over printed pages, all required precise focus. As printed material became more common, spectacles shifted from rare scholarly tools to practical necessities. Lens making improved in response. Artisans began experimenting with different curvatures to fine-tune magnification. By the 16th century, concave lenses were developed to correct myopia, allowing nearsighted individuals to see distant objects more clearly. For the first time, eyeglasses addressed not only age-related blur, but lifelong refractive errors. Optical theory advanced as well. In Italy and beyond, scholars studied how light refracts through curved surfaces. Later, in the 17th century, scientists like Johannes Kepler clarified how images form on the retina, deepening understanding of how lenses could correct vision. Glasses were no longer simple magnifiers. They became calculated instruments. Frames evolved too. Early rivet spectacles were gradually replaced by designs that could rest more securely on the nose. Materials expanded beyond wood and simple metal to include horn and leather. Portability and comfort improved. Spectacles also began to circulate beyond Italy. They spread through trade routes into France, Germany, England, and eventually across Europe. Workshops in cities like Nuremberg gained reputations for optical craftsmanship. Vision correction became part of daily life. The world itself had not changed. Streets were the same, faces familiar, but perception had. Fine print was legible, distant landmarks clearer. The horizon sharpened. The printing press amplified words. Eyeglasses ensured those words could be read. Together, they reshaped how knowledge moved through society and how individuals experienced the world in front of them. At first, spectacles were practical, functional, slightly awkward. But by the 17th and 18th centuries, they were becoming something more. As literacy expanded across Europe and social classes shifted, eyeglasses slowly detached from their purely scholarly identity. They entered salons, courts, and public life. And when objects enter public life, fashion follows. In France, aristocratic culture embraced refinement in every visible detail. Accessories became statements. Spectacles were no longer just tools for aging monks. They were symbols of intellect, sophistication, even subtle superiority. New designs emerged. The monocle appeared in the 18th century, a single corrective lens held in place by facial tension. It was impractical for most daily tasks, but powerful as a symbol. To wear one was to project status, discipline, and sometimes theatrical flair. Then came the lorgnette, spectacles mounted on a handle, popular in high society, particularly among women in Paris and later in Victorian England. The lorgnette allowed wearers to raise the lenses briefly to inspect a program, a painting, or, discreetly, another person across the room. Vision correction became performance. Meanwhile, in England, improvements in frame design led to the introduction of temple arms, side pieces that extended over the ears. This innovation, refined in the 18th century, allowed spectacles to rest securely without constant adjustment. Comfort and stability improved dramatically. Material choices also expanded. Tortoiseshell, silver, gold, and finely crafted steel frames signaled wealth. Spectacles were sometimes as ornate as jewelry. Yet the social meaning of glasses remained complex. For some, they signified wisdom. For others, weakness. Caricatures of scholars and bureaucrats often exaggerated spectacles to imply pedantry or frailty. Glasses could enhance authority or invite mockery. Still, their presence in portraits, paintings, and literature shows their growing normalcy. The act of seeing clearly was no longer hidden or apologetic. It was visible. Eyeglasses had moved beyond the monastery desk and into public identity. They were no longer just about correcting vision. They were about how one wished to be seen, while seeing the world more clearly than ever before. As spectacles entered daily life, science began to understand them more deeply. The 17th and 18th centuries were marked by rapid advances in optics. Light was no longer mysterious illumination. It became measurable, predictable, and mathematically describable. And as theory improved, so did eyeglasses. In England, scientists like Isaac Newton studied how light refracts and disperses through glass. Though Newton is more famous for gravity, his work on optics clarified how different wavelengths bend differently, a principle crucial for refining lenses. Chromatic aberration, the distortion caused by colours focusing at slightly different points, was a persistent problem in early lenses. Edges of objects sometimes appeared fringed with colour. Over time, lens makers experimented with improved glass compositions and grinding techniques to reduce such distortions. In Germany, optical workshops developed increasing precision. Grinding lenses became a specialized craft requiring meticulous calibration. Convex and concave lenses were standardized according to focal length, allowing prescriptions to be more accurately tailored. By the 18th century, bifocal lenses appeared, famously associated with Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia. Franklin reportedly grew tired of switching between separate glasses for reading and distance, so he combined two lens types into a single frame. The result was a practical innovation that addressed multiple visual needs at once. For the first time, eyeglasses could correct more than one problem simultaneously. Medical understanding of the eye advanced as well. Physicians began distinguishing between different refractive errors, myopia, hyperopia, and astigmatism. Lenses were shaped not merely to magnify, but to compensate for specific anatomical variations. Eyeglasses moved from artisanal guesswork to semi-scientific precision. This shift transformed public perception. Spectacles were no longer simple aids for aging scholars. They became medical devices, tools rooted in scientific knowledge. The relationship between wearer and world subtly changed. Clear sight was no longer dependent on luck or wealth alone. It could be calculated, measured, adjusted. The age of optics did more than refine lenses. It redefined vision as something understandable and correctable through science. For centuries, eyeglasses were handmade objects, crafted carefully, often expensively, and primarily available to those with means. But the 19th century changed that. Industrialization transformed nearly every aspect of production, and eyewear was no exception. Factories in countries like Germany, France, and the United States began producing lenses and frames at scale. Precision machinery allowed for consistent grinding and shaping. Standardized measurements replaced much of the guesswork that had defined earlier centuries. For the first time, eyeglasses became accessible to broader segments of society. At the same time, optometry emerged as a formal profession. Instead of buying spectacles from general merchants or travelling peddlers, people increasingly sought trained specialists who could measure vision and prescribe corrective lenses accurately. Vision testing evolved from informal trial and error to structured examination. Urbanization also played a role. As cities expanded and literacy rose, more people worked in occupations that required reading, writing, and detailed craftsmanship. Factory supervisors, clerks, teachers, machinists all relied on clear sight. Eyeglasses were no longer associated solely with scholars or elites. They became practical necessities for working professionals. Frame design improved significantly during this era. Wire-rimmed spectacles grew popular, offering durability and lighter weight. The addition of adjustable nose pads and refined temple arms increased comfort. Glasses could now be worn all day without constant repositioning. Cultural attitudes shifted as well. In earlier centuries, spectacles sometimes symbolized frailty. By the late 19th century, they increasingly represented seriousness and competence. Portraits of scientists, professors, and statesmen frequently featured glasses as part of their identity. Meanwhile, advancements in lens technology expanded corrective possibilities. Cylindrical lenses were introduced to correct astigmatism more precisely. Tinted lenses began to appear for glare reduction, foreshadowing modern sunglasses. Vision was no longer a privilege of craftsmanship alone. It became a product of industry. The democratization of eyeglasses meant that millions could continue working, learning, and aging with clarity. What began as a fragile invention in medieval Italy had become an everyday object, small, ordinary, and quietly transformative. The world had not changed, but far more people could now see it clearly. The 20th century accelerated everything, including vision correction. 2 world wars reshaped technology, materials science, and manufacturing. Eyewear evolved not only for reading and daily life, but for survival. During the First and Second World Wars, soldiers required protective goggles against debris, gas, and harsh environmental conditions. Military demand pushed research into stronger, lighter materials. Traditional glass lenses, though clear, were fragile and heavy. A shattering lens on the battlefield could cause serious injury. This need led to experimentation with plastics. In the 1940s, lightweight plastic lenses began replacing traditional glass. They were more impact-resistant and significantly lighter, making them more comfortable for extended wear. What began as military necessity soon entered civilian life. Optical science advanced rapidly as well. Precision instruments developed for telescopes, periscopes, and rangefinders refined lens grinding techniques. Companies such as Carl Zeiss in Germany became leaders in high-quality optics, influencing both military equipment and civilian eyeglasses. The boundary between scientific instrumentation and everyday eyewear blurred. Meanwhile, sunglasses gained prominence. Although tinted lenses existed earlier, modern sunglasses became widespread in the early 20th century. In the United States, brands like Ray-Ban emerged, initially developing glare-reducing aviator glasses for pilots. The design quickly transitioned into civilian fashion, linking eyewear with identity, rebellion, and celebrity culture. Contact lenses also advanced during this era. Early attempts at contact lenses date back to the late 19th century, but materials were uncomfortable and impractical. 20th century innovations in plastics made thinner, more wearable designs possible. Vision correction was no longer limited to frames resting on the face. By mid-century, eyeglasses were simultaneously medical devices, military equipment, and fashion statements. Frame styles reflected cultural trends. Thick acetate frames in the 1950s, minimalist wire designs in later decades. The meaning of glasses shifted again. They were no longer symbols of age alone. They could signal intellect, mystery, professionalism, or style. Film stars wore them, politicians wore them, musicians wore them. The century of war and rapid innovation transformed eyeglasses from delicate corrective tools into durable, customizable extensions of personal identity. Sight was protected enhanced and reimagined, all within a few decades of technological acceleration. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, eyeglasses entered a new era, one shaped not by hand grinding or basic industrial molds, but by digital precision. Computers transformed optics. Lens design software could now calculate curvature with microscopic accuracy. Instead of relying solely on standardized prescriptions, manufacturers began producing freeform lenses tailored to an individual's exact measurements, including head tilt, frame size, and even how the lenses sat relative to the wearer's eyes. Vision correction became personalized science. Advances in materials continued. Polycarbonate and high-index plastics allowed lenses to be thinner and lighter, even for strong prescriptions. Anti-reflective coatings reduced glare from artificial lighting and computer screens. Scratch-resistant and UV-protective layers became standard. The rise of digital screens introduced new challenges. People were no longer reading only books. They were staring at glowing monitors for hours each day. Blue light filtering lenses emerged as a response to eye strain concerns, though research continues to evaluate their full effectiveness. At the same time, contact lenses became more comfortable and accessible. Daily disposable lenses reduced infection risk. Soft hydrogel materials improved oxygen flow to the eye. For some, glasses became optional, worn for style rather than necessity. Laser eye surgery also entered the picture. Procedures like LASIK, developed in the late 20th century, offered surgical reshaping of the cornea to correct refractive errors permanently. For the first time in history, many people could eliminate their dependence on lenses altogether. Yet eyeglasses did not disappear. Instead, they evolved further into fashion and identity. Designers collaborated with luxury brands. Frames became bold, minimalist, retro, futuristic. Glasses were chosen as carefully as clothing. Even technology merged with eyewear. Smart glasses integrated cameras, audio systems, and augmented reality displays. Vision correction intersected with computing. From medieval reading stones to digital freeform lenses, the trajectory is astonishing. What began as a response to blur became an industry of precision engineering and aesthetic choice. Today, we rarely think about the centuries of experimentation behind the simple act of putting on glasses. We simply see. And perhaps that is the greatest testament to the history of eyeglasses. Their complexity has become invisible even as they continue shaping how we perceive the world. Eyeglasses did more than sharpen letters on a page. They quietly reshaped civilization. Before corrective lenses, aging often meant intellectual decline, not because the mind failed, but because the eyes did. Scholars, scribes, artisans, and administrators depended on close vision. Once it faded, productivity diminished. Knowledge transfer slowed. Spectacles extended intellectual life. A monk, copying manuscripts in medieval Italy, could continue working into old age. A printer in Germany during the age of Johannes Gutenberg could inspect fine type. A merchant in Venice could read contracts clearly. Eyeglasses preserved expertise. They prolonged careers. They kept teachers teaching, scientists experimenting, accountants calculating. Entire economies benefited from clearer vision. There was also a psychological shift. To correct sight was to intervene in nature. It reinforced a growing belief that human limitations were not fixed. If vision could be improved with glass and geometry, what else could be refined? Hearing aids, prosthetics, microscopes, telescopes, all followed the same principle. Perception could be engineered. Eyeglasses also shaped identity in subtler ways. They influenced stereotypes: the bespectacled scholar, the strict teacher, the meticulous clerk. At times, glasses carried stigma. At other times, they signaled intelligence or authority. In modern culture, they can project creativity, professionalism, or rebellion. They became part of how people present themselves to the world. In education, glasses helped democratize learning. Children who once struggled to read distant chalkboards could participate fully. Workers in factories could maintain precision. Drivers could navigate safely. The world did not physically change, but for millions it became sharper. The history of eyeglasses is not just a story of optics and glass making. It is a story of extended human potential, of refusing to accept blur as destiny, of bending light to serve knowledge. From polished lenses in 13th century workshops to digitally engineered frames today, eyeglasses represent something fundamental. They are proof that perception itself can be redesigned, and in doing so, they have shaped not only how we see the world, but how long and how clearly we are able to remain part of it.